Vikings are often remembered as raiders, but for your exam, you also need to explain how they settled in Western Europe. In this video, we're going to answer the key exam question: how far did the Vikings transform the places they settled in Western Europe? But first of all, what does this actually mean? When we talk about transformation, we're looking at how much the Vikings changed a place, including things like political control, settlement patterns, the culture, religion, language, and the population. And by how far means judging the extent of that change. Was it a complete transformation, partial, or was it limited? A key idea you'll need throughout is assimilation, when Vikings adopt local customs and become part of the society they settled in. So as we go through each region, keep asking yourself, did the Vikings transform the area or did they assimilate into it? Scotland and the islands. In Scotland and the surrounding islands like Shetland, Orkney and the Isle of Man, Viking settlement was deep and long-lasting. And to understand this, we need to consider the Picts who lived there before the Vikings arrived. The Picts were a group of tribes in northern Scotland. We know about them from carved stones, but after Viking settlement, their culture becomes much less visible. From around the year 800, Vikings settled in these islands, building rural coastal farms. Archaeological evidence shows they often took over Pictish sites, but rather than clear assimilation, the evidence suggests something more extreme. Burial evidence shows Vikings remained pagan, bringing their own beliefs instead of adopting local ones. By around the year 1000, Norwegian kings controlled these islands. What's important is that there is very little evidence of assimilation here. Instead, some historians believe the Picts were wiped out or fully replaced. Today, Viking influence is still clear in the place names like Wick and Ness, and strong Scandinavian ancestry. So in Scotland, Viking settlement led to major transformation with very little and very limited assimilation of the original population. England and the Danelaw. In England, Vikings controlled a large region known as the Danelaw, but their impact was more balanced between transformation and assimilation. They took control of fortified towns called burhs, which had originally been built by the Anglo-Saxons. Instead of destroying them, Vikings used them and adapted these burhs as centres of trade and control, showing some continuity. These burhs were ruled by a Viking jarl. York or Jorvik became a major Viking city ruled by jarls. However, Vikings did not completely replace the population, and many Anglo-Saxon traditions continued. We can see evidence of assimilation in religion, where coins show both Christian and Norse symbols, as you can see on the screen there. Over time, Vikings increasingly adopted Christianity. At the same time, they transformed aspects of daily life. Place names like Bee and Thorpe and Thwaite show strong Viking influence, and many Old Norse words entered the English language. So in England, there was a mixture of transformation and assimilation, with both Viking and Anglo-Saxon cultures shaping society. Ireland. Ireland shows one of the clearest examples of assimilation over time. At first, Vikings established coastal bases called long forts, which developed into towns like Dublin. These became major trading centres and played a key role in the Viking slave trade. Over time, though, assimilation became more important. Vikings intermarried with the Irish, they adopted the Gaelic language and converted to Christianity. By the 11th century, they were known as Norse Gaels, a clear sign that assimilation had taken place. So Island shows a transition from conflict and transformation to long-term assimilation. France and Normandy. In France, assimilation happened even more quickly. In 911, the French king made an agreement with the Viking leader Rollo, giving him land in Normandy. In return, Rollo converted to Christianity and agreed to defend the region. Here, Viking settlement was limited and assimilation was rapid. Vikings adopted French language, religion, and customs and became known as Normans. So instead of transforming the region, the Vikings themselves were transformed through assimilation. Let's have a look at an 18-mark past exam question. How far do you agree that the Vikings transformed the places they settled in Western Europe? So, looking at our arguments that the Vikings did transform Western Europe, so there is strong evidence that Vikings did transform many of the areas they settled in. They took control of large regions like the Danelaw and created their own kingdoms in Orkney and Shetland, showing major political change. They also used and controlled burhs in England, turning them into important Viking centres, and built major towns like Jorvik and Dublin, transforming trade and economies. Culturally, they had a lasting impact through place names and language, and in some areas like Orkney, their influence lasted for centuries. They also changed populations, particularly in Scotland, where there is little evidence of assimilation, and the disappearance of the Picts suggests major demographic transformation. All of this shows significant transformation, and therefore agreeing with the statement. On the other hand, transformation was not complete. So arguments that the Vikings did not fully transform Western Europe. In many regions, Viking settlement was limited, such as coastal Ireland and Normandy. Local traditions continued, showing that assimilation worked both ways. In England, Vikings adopted Anglo-Saxon burhs rather than replacing them, and houses in Jorvik often remained Anglo-Saxon in style. In Scotland, Vikings reused Pictish sites. Most importantly, in many areas, Vikings themselves assimilated. In France, they quickly became French, and in England and Ireland, they adopted Christianity, local languages, and customs. This suggests that instead of fully transforming these regions, Vikings were often absorbed through assimilation. Final judgment. Overall, the Vikings did transform parts of Western Europe, but not everywhere to the same extent. In Scotland, there was major transformation with little assimilation of the Picts. In England and Ireland, there was a balance between transformation and assimilation. And in France, assimilation was so strong that the Vikings had limited long-term impact. Therefore, Viking transformation was significant but uneven, with assimilation playing a key role in limiting their overall impact. If you can use the idea of assimilation alongside transformation and make clear comparisons, you're aiming for the highest marks here. Now try writing your own 18-mark answer using these ideas discussed in this video. You want to be spending about 25 minutes on your response.